Even though this type of learning has been thoroughly debunked for the last 25 years, it's still standard practice in most schools. Textbooks continue to encourage a model of learning which can be summed up as follows. Consciously knowing the rules of grammar will help you choose the right grammar when it's time to use it. That is the assumption, and it simply does not work, and it never has worked. It's basically a system that's set up for short-term memorization and pattern recognition in order to pass short-term tests. After that, the learner is on their own without the required language that they actually need. So this approach amounts to a type of teaching that spoon-feeds knowledge, expecting learners to remember and use that knowledge later. However, there's a disconnect between the part of the brain that stores this kind of, how can we call it, a kind of rules knowledge, facts knowledge, and the other part of the brain that stores linguistic knowledge. So we'll call that the linguistic brain. And that is the part of the brain where acquired language resides, where it can actually be located and used when it's time to communicate. Now, the fundamental problem with this teaching method is that children are forced to learn far too much grammar, far too soon, and in the wrong order, and also that they are expected to be accurate with their language pretty much immediately after learning it. The issue is often caused by allowing textbooks to dictate the syllabus instead of using the textbook as a tool for teachers to be allowed to selectively prioritize what they know is most important for the learners. It comes down to teacher agency in a lot of cases. More often than not, schools attempt to cover everything in the textbook, which leads to learning shortcuts, and it creates the illusion of learning by relying on short-term memorization and testing very soon after teaching in order to prove that learning has taken place. But this is not really evidence of true language acquisition. Instead, it perpetuates a mistaken belief that language knowledge is the same as other types of knowledge, a belief that decades of research has proved to be false. So for grammar teachers, this kind of approach offers a sense of safety, especially to those who struggle to control their classrooms or create the type of learning environment which is necessary to promote language acquisition. To truly help students acquire language, teachers would need to design a more communicative, activity-based lessons that promote authentic practice. Through real experiences using the language and not worrying too much about making mistakes, students will begin to acquire the new grammatical tense more naturally. Unfortunately, the current model prioritizes accuracy from the start, which inhibits learners from developing confidence in their ability to communicate because they're thinking about errors all the time. Accuracy first teaching, as opposed to fluency first, puts the cart before the horse. What learners really need is to gain familiarity using the language and experiencing its different forms. Once fluency is developed, teachers can revisit those forms, analyze them, and provide activities to help students better understand those rules once they're familiar with the tense. A well-informed classroom or school should focus on building this experience with using language forms first and then returning to grammar rules later on once the learners have a foundation in the language and they're more familiar with the contexts in which they're used. Sadly, the structure of examinations and testing nowadays does still force learners and teachers to take shortcuts. Teachers are often expected to teach specific tenses on specific days, which means that they must ensure that students demonstrate some sort of knowledge of those forms immediately. In my 17 years of teaching, I've seen most learners revisit the same forms year on year, every year, and still be making the same mistakes when they're communicating. This repetition, without real progress, really damages their confidence. It makes learners aware that their learning isn't working, which can have very serious long-term negative effects on their motivation and their ability to learn. So if we want to truly serve today's learners and prepare them for international related careers or overseas opportunities that they might face in the future, we need to shift our focus. We need to prioritize building their confidence in communicating rather than relying on short-term approaches that fail to serve them in the long run.